All right. Well, I hit record. So this is episode, and I never say the number because sometimes my numbers get out of sequence. So look at your screen. You'll see what episode this is. This episode today is a special one for me because the person we have joining us today is someone that I've talked to off and on a little bit about coming on this podcast in the past. And it finally is happening today that we are recording an episode together. This guy is a person I went to high school with and was good friends with throughout that time. And we recently connected at an unofficial high school reunion that occurred, I guess, about 3 weeks ago now. And so I want to welcome my good friend Brian to the podcast.
Hey, Clark. Thank you very much for having me on today.
This is really cool. I'm so glad that you're able to join. When we met at the high school reunion, we had a chance to talk after and brought this whole topic up about the podcast, and you said you'd be interested. So I think it's awesome that we're getting a chance to do this.
Yeah, very much so. I've been looking forward to it since you brought it up. I've always enjoyed doing this kind of thing. Back in university, used to do radio up in Moosonee. I haven't been on a microphone in a long time, so it's nice to get back to get a chance to do something like this.
Yes, absolutely. And I forgot about that you had done some radio stuff. You've also you've done a lot of theater as well. You did theater in high school. I think we did at least one show together. It was the one about the priest.
Yeah, I want to say The Fifth Element, but that's not what it was. It was the fifth something about the Archbishop Romero from El Salvador. I remember that. Benefits of a Catholic high school that you got to do Catholic plays.
This is where I said earlier before we recorded, I'd love to have a producer who could be typing in the name of that and just shoot us it. But the Archbishop Romero, it was a play. And, one of the things you mentioned to me when we chatted after the reunion was you've never really had a chance. Well, correct me if I'm wrong. You haven't had a lot of opportunities to do creative things, I guess, since you, as a police officer, which we haven't mentioned, you're a police officer for what,
26 years now.
26. Yeah. And that tapping into the creative is something that you have a desire for. Have you had a chance to do any kind of creative stuff since you became a police officer?
Oh, certainly. I did some independent published novels that I had published, and then locally, the local theater group, they wanted to do some murder mysteries, and they asked me to pen some murder mysteries for their charity money drive. They did a dinner murder mystery evening, so I wrote 3 or 4 of those. I also kind of incorporated myself in, usually as the host, to kind of guide through, and then the actors with the local theater group would go out and sit at the tables and give out the clues, and by the end of the night, each table would guess who the murderer was, and prizes would be given out. And typically I would be either a police officer, and get kind of typecast in that way, but
right.
Either I'd be a police officer, or I think I was a news reporter one time, and you'd end up arresting the murderer and drag them out, and they were very successful. They stopped doing them there. Like everything in our society, I think COVID took a stop on a lot of activities, but I got to do that. So that was very nice to engage in that kind of creativity, because I do like writing and a little bit of theater side to it as well. So it was nice, because as you say, in my line of work, I don't get to be too creative. I get to pen a lot of reports, but don't get to work outside and fabricate or embellish. So it's kind of nice.
We hope. I guess the embellish is kind of a bad thing in police work.
Absolutely. So I try to keep that to a minimum. That was nice. And yeah, it's nice to get into that kind of stuff. And I guess much like yourself, I guess in insurance brokering, not a lot of creative opportunities, so you find them outside.
Yeah, it's true. And being in insurance probably roughly around the same amount of time. I think it's 26 plus years, maybe 27. And I've always wanted to, before I got married, and before we had kids, I was doing community theater, primarily community theater, I guess, was my outlet for the creative side. But then once kids come along, a lot of that stuff, like some of the shows I did, it's a couple months of rehearsing 2-3 nights a week sometimes. And then when the shows are up, it's like 5 out of 7 days, sometimes 2 shows on a Sunday for like a matinee. And it can be a lot. But yeah, that's how I've found my creative side is through mostly community theater. And then this podcast started up in 2019. We were just talking about how May 2019 was when we've released the first episode, and hard to believe it's almost exactly 3 years later.
Yeah. And it is interesting how much kids can, as an involved father, how much kids do affect any level of creative time. I always said to my wife, I kind of had to stop writing because it's very difficult to focus on something, put your attention and I guess creativity, for lack of a better term, into focus when there's a constant interruption in your house, pretty much. And from waking till bedtime, there's always kind of a noise or an activity or a need that you have to attend to.
And now you're in a I don't know if I'm allowed to say where you're exactly broadcasting from, but it's it's Ontario.
Bancroft, Ontario.
Okay, Bancroft, which is what's the population there?
The actual town, about 3,500.
3,500.
Yeah,
okay.
and probably the surrounding communities, maybe up to 10,000. That'd probably be a little bit generous, but all the smaller little communities and villages around, and it's a fair-sized area that I live in, like geographically.
So the reason I was mentioning that was because you were talking about just getting away for like distraction free is not usually something that's possible with kids. So I've always had this dream of building this. Bill Gates has something he calls think weeks, where he will just disappear to some cabin in some remote area. The only thing he's got is a refrigerator with Diet Cokes in it. I think that's like his staple drink for when he goes on these things. And I guess obviously some supplies to survive for a week, but it's pretty minimalist. Like it's a desk. I don't think he has any electronics. It's a desk with a notepad, a pen and paper. And, he has these think weeks. And I thought about you when you mentioned, because I know you're in kind of a remote area, but you don't have this cabin in the back of your property that you could just disappear into and get all that creative stuff out.
No, unfortunately not. I'm sure my wife would have problems if I kept disappearing out to it all the time as well anyways. So,
well, I've been trying to convince my wife to build a studio in our backyard, and it's not that far, so you'd be able to find me pretty easily, but we've never really landed on a decision. I think it kind of went south when I suggested we add running water, a toilet, and turn it into an Airbnb.
Interesting. Or should make you move out there permanently, one way or the other, depending on.
Hey, she might not have thought of that part. But the Airbnb thing she didn't like. She said, I don't want these random people just waltzing through our backyard. And I said, well, why not? We could, when we go away, we just, a couple nights, we have it as an Airbnb.
Yeah,
so,
not a bad idea.
We had a few things we were bouncing around over the last few weeks around topics. And I think we've chosen to talk about one central topic and then a few just rapid fire type things. So, The topic we were discussing was, and I've thought about this off and on for years, is TV shows or movies that beg for a remake, or conversely should never be remade. That if that's something people will often say about certain things, that should never be remade. It's you just can't make it better or improve on it, or don't go down that road again or whatever. So I wanted to ask you, because I know that movies is a big thing. You like movies. Yeah. Even TV shows. There were certain TV shows I remember as a kid. MASH jumps out for me. I know that was a big show for you.
And yours was Little House on the Prairie. That was your family's favorite show to watch. I remember that. We had discussions on that.
We did. I think and I'm a little embarrassed about Little House on the Prairie. It's kind of just sounds a little so. We did it. I think we did a swap night once where I watched a MASH episode and you watched.
And I watched Little House on the Prairie.
And I think we both concluded, let's stick to our shows.
it wasn't without its merits. Little House on the Prairie. It just wasn't one that, like I say, MASH was my father. My father loved MASH, so that was always on, and
Oh,
that's kind of how I kind of gravitated towards it.
well, I did, and and quite often when there's a show out there that people really really enjoy, especially if it's friends of mine, I do get intrigued because I think if I'm friends with this person and they have this show they really like, I feel like that's a show that there's a good chance I will also like.
Mm-hmm.
And with the case of MASH, I probably didn't give it enough of a chance. But what is it primarily about MASH? Just, we might get into this a little bit in this topic, but I just want to ask you, what was about MASH that you really liked?
The irreverent sense of humor and the quick-wittedness of, especially in the earlier episodes when it first got, but towards the end it got a bit more dramatic and ponderous on the topics in the episodes. I think it ran for something like 11 seasons. It was on for a long time. But the first half dozen or so seasons just had a really rapid fire sense of humor, quick-witted comebacks. Really enjoyed that. Found a great humor in that. The fact that it was filmed, I guess, in the 70s and 80s, but it was set in the 50s. So it being a period piece, I found that it, in a way, kind of stayed timeless. That unlike trying to watch Three's Company now or The Cosby Show, they're so locked into their time period that they become dated almost immediately. Whereas I found MASH, even kind of as high school, because it was 11 seasons of reruns, pretty much I was more exposed to. It stayed timeless because it was set in the 50s. So
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
so the humor itself, like I said, was very witty, very, very rapid fire, very quick, and just kind of a timeless quality and a sense of drama to it, which I think we see at more modern in the 21st century now with sitcoms. Very few laugh track, ha sitcoms. Most comedies on your Netflix or your Prime or Crave, HBO, they're sitcom-esque, but there's also a lot of pathos and drama to them. And again, MASH had that because it was set in a war, so it had a bit of a black comedy quality to it.
Right. Huh. And a favorite character, was there one?
Oh, Hawkeye Pierce, Alan Alda's character. I again just love that sense of humor.
I like one of my things I really like about Alan Alda is just his voice.
Mm-hmm.
He's just got a great voice. And Mike and I, who's actually been on this show, we've talked about actors who just have great voices.
Mm-hmm.
And most of them do. I guess that's part of why they're great actors is the voice. You know, like a Harrison Ford, for example. The voice is got such a great voice.
Yeah, I mean, there's always the classics: the Morgan Freeman, James Earl Jones, Patrick Stewart, Orson Welles. If you want to go back a little bit farther, these phenomenal deep bass voices that are soothing and like I say, have a bit of gravitas to them. You're engaged by it immediately.
Yeah. Well, let's get into this topic. So, I mean, I mentioned it to you a little while ago and just wondered, do you have a TV show or movie out there? Let's maybe, I don't know how much thought you've given it, but is there I'll keep it open-ended, TV show or movie that comes to mind that you just are dying to see remade?
Well, you'd mentioned that topic, and I'd thought about it a bit because right now you see a over reliance, especially by, I'm going to put the tag on Disney. Disney has been remaking a lot of their animated as live actions, and now my kids are just kind of getting out of that stage where I don't have to go see them quite so much. But they've redone some animated movies that I remember watching with my kids over the years that were I would have said were perfect films. Disney did very well, especially through the 80s and into the 90s. They were putting out some phenomenal animated movies, and now they remake those. And the problem is, I'm kind of like, why are you remaking it live action Aladdin or Beauty and the Beast or Jungle Book? And I'm a little bit more hesitant to enjoy them because I think that they were done perfectly in animated form. But there's a couple of ones that weren't that successful. There's one that my kids liked called Treasure Planet. I don't know if you've seen that one.
No.
Basically, it's a science fiction version of Treasure Island. And it had a very, very interesting design aesthetic. Essentially, it made no sense on a logical level, but basically the spaceships were like old 17th and 18th century sailing ships. And they looked like that, and they were traveling through space. And it was a very, very interesting design aesthetic. And I thought, now that in live action, that movie was not successful in the theaters, didn't make a lot of money.
Sorry, as a live action?
As an animated movie. It was from 2002, and it was one of Disney's kind of failures. And but the design aesthetic on it would have been fantastic as a live action. I'm quite a science fiction guy. I like science fiction stuff. So that was just kind of my thoughts on that. But if I had one that I just don't understand why they have not remade it yet, is the 1976 movie Logan's Run. I don't know if you remember that one.
I know I've heard of it, but I've not seen it.
It's pre-Star Wars, so the kind of Star Wars in 1977 through 79 special effects kind of started taking leaps forward. So the special effects are a little lackluster.
And this is a movie you think could be a good
remade. It would be excellent if it was remade. It's essentially it's a futuristic society where it's basically a utopian society, but when you reach the age of 30, you're automatically terminated. And then the plot is about people trying to escape from that. And I was surprised that through the about 10 to 15 years ago, it really started with young adult popular science fiction movies, and I was shocked that Logan's Run was never remade. It had a lot of really neat concepts. It's based on a book from the late 60s, and it was a really neat concept about the perception of youth. I think it's only kind of gotten more relevant now that the idea of that youth is perfection and anything older is disposable. And I think that's one I'm shocked that they haven't remade by this point.
Well, there was a 2023 article I just pulled up as you're talking here, where somebody actually talked about this. How should a remake of Logan's Run be done? And one of the things they say is the original authors have since passed away, and that there's no way to talk to them or consult them on, I guess, if we were to do this, how would we do it? But I mean, there's got to be other movies or things like that out there where they didn't have the original writers. I mean, Shakespeare isn't around to ask him about, not that you're writing Shakespeare plays, but I mean, they made movies with Shakespeare plays. So,
and if I recall properly, the novel was that you got terminated at age 21 or 25. It was even younger than that idea in the movie that it was 30, but it was basically you enjoyed your youth and then you were terminated.
Well, what's interesting though is because there are movies like Hunger Games, for example, is similar to that type of theme, right?
And you had a bunch of those.
Maybe
you had Hunger Games and Maze Runner and Divergent, and there was a real glut of them there for a period.
Yeah, so why not go with a Logan's Run?
Mm-hmm.
What about? Well, I'll share mine. I guess mine was. I remember when I went. And this is actually. I'd like to see a remake of the remake, which when I went to see this movie. Ideally, I should have watched this again before talking about it now. So I'm basing it off the memory of when it came out, which was 20 plus years ago now, I think. And it was the remake of War of the Worlds, where I remember being there thinking, this isn't, I didn't enjoy it. I didn't think it was very well done. And
is this the Tom Cruise version that you're talking about?
Yeah. Has there been one? There hasn't been one since then, has there?
There's been 2 television series. There was one set in the 1800s, based on when H.G. Wells had originally set it at the end of the 1800s, early 1900s. And then there was another one. It was kind of a modern take. It had almost not. I think they took the name. I'm going to guess that the name War of the Worlds is probably public domain at this point, and they just kind of tapped it onto this television series.
I remember being in the theater, and of course, the original War of the Worlds is very old, and it's dated, it's black and white, and it's probably got some cheesy factors all throughout it. But there was just something to me that I think that movie actually would have made a great remake, just to update it and make it take that concept and make it just modernize it and make it have all the access to the special effects. But I do remember coming home after seeing it, being quite underwhelmed about it. And I think I mentioned it to my dad about my experience, because he's the one who got me on the original War of the Worlds. We went through one of these once VCRs came out. We got into like him wanting to share with me some of the things he grew up watching and that had influence. And I remember saying this movie, I just didn't really think it did it, this remake. And he said, well, who knows? Maybe they'll make another one. Mm-hmm. And I just thought, didn't really think about someone making a remake of a remake. I don't know if any movies come to mind where they have done that. Nothing.
Well, there's about a jillion Scrooges or Christmas carols. There's the famous Ten Commandments. Was redone a couple of times. Ben-Hur's been done a few times. A lot of those are the quote-unquote classic versions from your 50s and 60s are typically remakes of the silent version originally.
Yeah. Again, probably begging for a remake in that sense, because while it was silent,
yes,
or so like the access to the technology and the special effects that one could use in a movie like War of the Worlds that was originally made in what, the 40s would it be?
1953.
53, yeah.
George, yeah.
So to take something like an older movie like that and use all the available technology to make it even better, I guess some would argue, well, it shouldn't just be about the technology, and it shouldn't. That's probably where some of these things fall into the traps of, well, like they've got the great technology to back it up, but then the script falls short.
And that's a classic. I mean, I loved the 1953 George Pal War of the Worlds. That's a great classic science fiction movie. Acting's a little bit cornier. The effects actually were excellent for the time. They were actually quite impressive. But the remake, for all its gloss and money thrown at it, and it didn't work for me either.
Yeah.
The story of one family dealing through this, just I don't know if it was inconsequential to me. It looked good, the effects and it looked really well, but didn't care for the movie at all.
Anything else that you can think of that falls into maybe a TV show, perhaps? Is there a MASH remake? Could there be a MASH remake?
Again, because
they need a MASH remake.
I would say no again, because it was set it was already a period piece, so you can't really update it. I haven't seen a lot of remade television shows that I've been overly impressed with. Honestly, they redid Magnum PI. I mean, these shows have their fans, but the classic version appeals to me. The remakes don't. I think television can be more forgiving for doing a new series in that vein without stealing the name. V, they redid V. There's a classic one.
Yes, and there's a classic one that, to me, in fairness, I didn't even watch the remake because I watched a few of the trailers and saw enough examples of it that said to me, no, they have not. This isn't going to work for me. Yeah, and I don't. Sorry,
no, I was going to say, go ahead. I was going to say, why take V? Do another alien invasion theory. You're just stealing the name for name recognition, and unfortunately, it takes so much away from the original. It's not that series anymore.
And I think maybe, why do they? Maybe because the template's already there, that it's easy to just take the template, the characters and the storyline. Like if you made that movie basically was the Holocaust updated in modern times, it would have been the 80s when it first came out, that you took the concept of these visitors coming and they reacted very much like a Nazi takeover, right? Yeah. Where there was propaganda and there was, we'll take care of you. We're going to make this world a better place now that we're here, and we're going to just borrow your water. And then you found out about all the secret stuff going on in the background. People were disappearing, and you had there was a youth group. I loved that series. That was a really impactful series for me as a teenager, the series V.
Mm-hmm. And it was excellent. Like I say, they remade it. They didn't improve on it. I didn't watch it all the way through, but I watched enough to say, no, not for me. Battlestar. Sorry, just before we move on from V, the thing about V I found, and I find a lot with remakes, is that it lacks a certain texture of some type, where it's, I don't know, if overproduced, if you want to call it that. Like it's too clean, too perfect looking. The actors are
perfect looking. It's just not, it doesn't have this texture
Mm-hmm.
that if you go back and look at some of the, I think if you go back to V, it would have a lot of cheesiness for sure, given the time period it was written in. And I think you would see, and some of the effects are pretty, probably pretty, today wouldn't hold up that well. I just find that a lot of these productions are just too clean, too overproduced, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. A lack of grittiness. I mean, a lot of that stuff's getting filmed on digital now compared to the video back in the 80s, which I think even just texturally to the recording that, I don't know, just it has a certain realism to it because of the grittiness.
Another movie remake, a good example of movies that have been remade that are remakes of remakes, I guess, if you want to call it that, is Superman.
Yes.
Superman, for me, I struggle. Christopher Reeve is the Superman for me.
Yes. 1979 Superman. It was an excellent, one of the best comic book movie before there were comic book movies.
And when I watch some of the newer ones, Brandon Routh and some of the other guys that have been in those Superman movies, and in fairness, I haven't watched them all. I have watched one, and I can't remember which one it was. Just to me, it just didn't land for me.
Mm-hmm.
Just didn't land. It felt like this is an imposter. Christopher Reeve should be here right now.
Yeah.
But I was never a Superman comic guy, so I didn't have, my experience with Superman was the Christopher Reeve movies. My name's Clark, so I got a lot of Clark Kent references, so I've felt a bit of an affinity to Superman because of that. For me, Superman wasn't a comic book character. It was Christopher Reeve in those movies.
Yeah, and the only other, much the same way, my brother was a bit of a comic book aficionado. I don't know if he was that big into the Superman ones, but wasn't something I was particularly into. But the only other reference for a lot of those characters came from Saturday morning cartoons for me.
Right.
The Justice League for Superman, or Spider-Man and Friends for the Marvel side, long before the Marvel movies started to take over the cinemas.
A movie that I had heard about being made, and I don't know if it ever happened, because I think it was supposed to happen and then it didn't happen. But I loved the Battle of the Planets cartoon as a kid.
G-Force.
Yes. Yeah. And it's based on a Japanese animated series, Gatchaman. And for a while I'd been hearing about a live action version of that. And, going back to your point about why take things that are animated and make them into live action, and I hadn't thought about that. My selfishly was hoping they would make this movie because it was something I enjoyed so much as a kid. But when you now mention, maybe you're just messing around with something that's meant to be animated, not to be live action. But there was a hope for me of seeing some of that stuff that was nostalgic to me end up in a modern movie. Mm-hmm. But my belief in whether they could pull that off enough to satisfy me in the way like the Superman movies have not, I'd be extremely skeptical of a live action Gatchaman or G-Force being good.
Mm-hmm. That one would be kind of interesting. I almost think that it would make better as like a Netflix series or something a little more like the cartoon series was itself, because it had a bit of a mythology behind it, as I recall.
Yes.
A little bit hard to capture in 2.5 hours.
The spaceship, I was absolutely obsessed with the spaceship, the Phoenix. I built models of it. My dad helped me build a balsa wood model of that spaceship, the Phoenix. And of course, I just remember certain episodes where things would happen to it, like it would get damaged, and then I'd want to create damage on mine and fix it. Yeah. It was just this thing that it had this thing on the top, a bubble that the guys would go in. It was like a little globe. Yeah. And it would open up like in this, it was like a half glass dome on top of the ship that it would open up for them, and then they would go in, it would close, and they would drop down into the ship. And I remember wanting to have that effect. And I think I took one of those gumball machine.
Oh, the toy holders?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that had it was a dome sort of shape, and I glued that on top of it. So yeah, that was a lot of interesting memories. But yeah, and I don't want to stray too much into other topics, but this is something that Mike was able to get his hands on, the G-Force, like Battle of the Planets. This was 20 years ago. He got a hold of from somewhere. It was kind of pre-internet. Maybe it was even longer than 20, probably 30 years ago. He got a hold of the series on VHS, I think. I don't know if they were bootlegged or what they were. I think they were. And we started watching it, of course. And there was a little bit of that disappointment. Like we'd burst the spell.
Yeah.
And I do find now that with the prevalence of YouTube and so much material being available on the internet, we can almost take any memory from our childhood and find it. Like if it was media related, we can find it. And toys, of course, we could find those too, I guess, so I feel like I burst the spell a bit when I go and do that. So I'm cautious about that sometimes, but I usually can't resist and I do it anyway.
It's kind of funny. You're almost exactly what you're talking about. They have a new Dungeons and Dragons movie out. And I remember, I love the Dungeons and Dragons Saturday morning cartoon. So I called up some episodes on YouTube. It was a Saturday morning cartoon from the early 80s is what it was. And all the cheapness and corner cutting and that. And I was like, that wasn't quite as magical as I remember it being.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, nostalgia has its place, and sometimes it's best left where it is.
Yeah. How about something that so Night Court was a TV series. Do you know they're making a remake of it?
I tried to watch one episode.
Oh, so it's already happened?
Yeah, it's already out. I tried to watch an episode. I got about 10 minutes into it. It's again, sitcoms are very dated. I mean, to the time that they're in typically. There's very few exceptions. I think Friends, I'm surprised how popular it continues to be. I mean, when Friends was on, that was my age. I was in post-secondary and they're all living in these apartments trying to squeak by a living. I'm like, I'm living in an apartment trying to squeak by a living, hanging out in the coffee shops with friends. It really spoke to me at that time. And then I learned, it's just as popular as ever 25, 30 years later. And like, that's interesting.
I think some show like Netflix, I don't know if Netflix shows it or if it's Prime, but I think you can get these series on Netflix now. And I think it's created a second generation of fans for these shows.
And that's an interesting one. But a lot of other ones I don't think necessarily play down. Like I say, I was Three's Company, which was such an edgy, hilarious show at the end of the 70s into the 80s. Try to watch an episode now. It's difficult. It's challenging in terms of the corniness of it.
Yeah. Anything else on this that you're jumping to talk about or say?
Did we talk about things that should never be remade?
Well, what shouldn't be remade in your opinion?
Just quickly, I mean, there's just certain movies that I found that they did perfectly. Shawshank Redemption, I thought, is a movie that they made once, and God, I hope they never remake it again because it was just pitch perfect. Also, again, helping, going back to that same thing with MASH, it's a period piece. And they did such a good work at capturing that period, similar to The Green Mile, which is same director, same writer that wrote it. It's a period piece, and it captures that time period perfectly. And then it's firing on all pistons in terms of dialogue and acting. I don't think there's anything you could add to it that wouldn't do well. Movie Jaws, I don't think you could remake that now. I think that that movie was very well made, but if you tried to make that now in a modern age of more conscientious public in terms of what sharks are or what nature is and our relationship with nature, I don't think it would work the same way that a giant shark is the villain. There's 1,000 cheap movies that do that kind of story, but to actually do a proper cinematic film that like Jaws, you couldn't do. And then other ones through that era, like E.T., I think that was captured perfectly. When
E.T. That was a movie I really was disturbed by in the theater. When he's sick on the bathroom floor or in the creek, when they find him in the creek, I can't watch that. That's a memory on my, like, that's imprinted on me, that if my kids say, "Hey, let's watch IT,"
tech support, whatever.
E.T. is one that I would hesitate because I wouldn't want my kids to go through the sadness I felt watching E.T. in the creek, all pale and sick.
And I showed my kids E.T. years ago, and it was kind of a, okay. Nothing, it didn't capture. So to remake it, to update it for a younger audience, I don't think it could. You'd have to take too much away from the original core of it in order to modernize it, and that would just strip it away.
Well, let's move on to our next range of topics, which we had pulled a few random topics that we're going to spend maybe a couple minutes on each. So this is the rapid fire round, and I'm just going to pick one of the ones we had. We wrote a bunch down, and I'm just going to randomly pick one here. So, favorite teacher in high school. Who was your favorite teacher in high school?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I don't know because I read that question. I'm going, well, who was my favorite teacher in high school? There were teachers I certainly like. You know who I'm going to go with? It's kind of a weird one because I didn't have a close relationship or anything. I'm going to say Amrit Lal. Mr. Lal, our science teacher. He seemed, in terms of like as a teacher, there are other teachers whose personalities I certainly enjoyed more. Nothing against Mr. Lal's personality. He was, but he seemed to have a passion for teaching, a really strong knowledge of science. He seemed to have the answers, and again, might be like watching G-Force. That's all nostalgia and looking back. But he seemed to really know when he was answering a question. But he had to have an enthusiasm to teach the class, and he had an intelligence, and he seemed to like teaching and enjoy teaching the students. And he's probably up there. Another one that
he was funny too.
He was funny too. Another one that was like that was Jim Foy.
I wrote this down, Brian, because when you heard you say you didn't really have someone, my memory is Mr. Foy was a favorite of yours.
Jim Foy. He was a history teacher, and very similar to Amrit Lal. He had, like you said, the humor. He had a humor to it. He had a knowledge, because you'd ask him questions, and boom, he could, oh no, that's because of this, and that's in this context. Always enjoyed his classes.
There was something about Mr. Foy, though, that I remember hearing about that was, to me, a bit off in terms of what you're describing. It didn't fit the personality, and maybe it did. You knew him a lot better than me, but remember when he became like vice president or vice principal, I should say, and he would give people lines to write out?
Yes, I never appreciated that. I thought I remember because we could black shoes. We had to wear black dress shoes, and I liked wearing black sneakers. That looked pretty darn good, and done it for 4 or 5 years. Maybe it was OEC's probably grade 13, when we were in grade 13 back when they had that. He came in and said, okay, no, those aren't appropriate shoes, right lines. I'm like, been wearing them for 4 years. I don't know why this is a problem now. Of course, by that point, I'm 18 and indignant teenager. So I guess
18 though, and making people write lines.
Yeah.
Like, in general, the writing, like if I think about that practice of saying, okay, go home and write, I don't even know what they would say, 1,000 lines or 10 or 50 lines. I can't remember. And it would just, I don't know, was that some sort of affirmation exercise maybe that they were after when it came to why they got kids to write lines? Or was it just to put them through something so purely tedious and boring that they would never want to go through that again?
I think it's the second one. And
so? Yeah,
for sure. I think, and it's such a good method that I think that a lot of anyone under the age of 30 would be shocked to hear that even existed into the 80s and 90s. Yeah. It's certainly nothing you hear about anymore. It's actually an incredible waste of time, of tedium.
Oh yeah. Like my dad's idea of punishment was to make me write a book report.
Mm-hmm.
So I got into trouble once at school. We'll probably do a future episode where we dig into that a bit. I did mention in a previous episode about the Operation O situation, Operation Octopus.
Mm-hmm.
So when I got into trouble for that, my dad, and there was a few other things attached to that trouble, by the way, it wasn't just an octopus. My dad's suggested solution was that I read, what was it? It was a Charles Dickens book, not Oliver Twist, but one of the ones they're all about the hard times that are going on.
The melancholy of the Victorian era and the hardships therein. Yeah.
I think it was a person's name was the name of it. Not Oliver Twist, but another one. that my dad thought I would be sufficiently punished if I had to write a book report, and I guess gain an appreciation for what life could be like and how grateful I should be and all that sort of stuff. And the principal at the time, Miss LeBrun, agreed to it. So that's what I had to do. I had to write a book report on, it's just not coming off my...
I'm trying to think. Great Expectations comes to my mind right now, but I can't think of...
this is again where we need that producer, David Copperfield.
Oh, that's one I'm not very familiar with. I don't really know David Copperfield, but
well, I guess if any indication, all I remember is it was about a guy who had a rough childhood, and that's about it. But I do remember doing the report, and I guess it satisfied the people at the time that was a sufficient punishment. So Mr. Lau, Mr. Foy. For me, it was a Mr. And I didn't have Mr. Foy. I had Mr. Lau, and I actually really liked him. He was very serious, but had a funniness to him. I don't know how you describe it. But my teacher, Mr. Nesmith, I had in grade 12, OAC year, which we don't really have these days. This was a guy who I think on the first test, I got like an 87% on, it was an economics class I took, and I got 87% on the first class or first test we had to do. And for me, I was never really a student who was knocking out of the park with those types of marks. I was like a 68, 70-ish at best kind of guy. And when I got that 87 or whatever it was, it shocked me so much that I suddenly was almost snapped into this, geez, maybe I can be good in school.
Mm-hmm.
And he just seemed to take this interest in me of someone that he thought was a great student, perhaps because of this grade or whatever, that from there on, I tried harder for every time we had a test or anything. I would study so hard because I was worried about losing that momentum of getting that 87%. And he was someone that just had a lot of faith in me. I remember one time he said, after a class was over, as I was packing up, he said, "Did you think that was a bit like that was too complicated, that subject today? Like, how do you think that went over with the class?" And again, I was like, no one's ever asked me this kind of stuff. He just instilled this confidence and made me see getting good marks in school as a different, and that bled into other courses that I was taking as well. So helped me get into university.
I didn't have him. I never had him.
And you did that was at Dumbarton High School, where I just did 1 year.
Oh,
you
I went there as well,
too,
yeah.
right?
I was there for half a semester there.
So, okay, well, let's move on to our next one. All right, this one was one we talked about a while ago. Is there a skill you learned at an early job that you still use today?
I spent most of my my high school and actually into university as well, working as a cashier at a grocery store. At the Dominion store back when there was Dominion.
I remember it.
And you know, it's a very basic answer, and it's dealing with people, talking to people. Because I mean, you're pushing the groceries through, and you're talking to people at a rapid fire, trying to keep people happy, trying to be pleasant and polite and professional. Certainly, that translated very well into policing. That ability to, here comes a new stranger, and hi, I'm going to be friendly to you and professional to you, and hopefully you respond well to that. And the vast majority of the time people do. As long as you're polite and respectful and pleasant, you'll 95% of the time get the same thing back. So that's kind of an easy answer. The other one I worked after university. I worked for, it was kind of a division of the Toronto Star at the end of the newspaper.
Beaver Creek something, wasn't it?
It was the Metro, it was called. Metro Press, which was actually owned by Toronto Star. So they printed off sections of the Toronto Star. Printed off a lot of the local newspapers, like the Pickering Advertiser or a lot of the local smaller papers. So I sat at the end of the line, jogging the piles as they came up, wrapping them and putting them on a skid, and doing that for between 8 and 12 hours, depending what shift you got. I learned there that I never wanted to do work like that ever again. That factory working, God bless the people who do them, because it was tedious to the tedium of the repetition, the lack of stimulation. was harsh, and I realized that I needed to be in some kind of work that required me to work with people, like some sort of interaction, because it's deafening in there. So you're wearing headphones the entire time. You can't converse. If you do, you're screaming at the person across. So you're surrounded by people and isolated at the same time. And that was just a lesson that I would rather have gotten into a career that allowed me to think a little bit and interact with people a little bit, and variety and things like that.
I thought maybe because I knew you did I think you worked for a couple of different grocery places, that you were going to say that you learned how to bag your own bags. Like you when a lot of places make you bag your own bags.
Oh, I'm excellent at it. I am excellent at it. I can fit all sorts of stuff in and make sure nothing gets crushed.
Does your wife just push it all to you and say, "Here, do you do it, Brian"?
No, not typically. No, I never thought about that skill I learned. That has been a very useful skill. Yes, but especially now that basically everywhere makes you do your own bagging.
Or bring your own bag and all that. Are you like a guy who goes bowling where you got your own grocery bag?
No.
Like with your name on it? It's a special bag.
My special bowling ball. No, that's not me.
For me, I did a lot of work in the restaurant business. So I worked for a couple different restaurants, and the thing that I like to, it's my sort of bagging grocery skill, is I can carry multiple plates in one hand.
I would like that one. My son's doing. He's working with a local restaurant. He says that's what he's terrified to do. Have to carry a bunch of plates or a bunch of glasses.
Yeah. So I can do like three. I could carry, say, 3 dinner plates in one hand, and then put a fourth on my arm.
That's a useful skill. That is a useful skill.
Although, if you're hosting family, you kind of look like a waiter, I guess, coming out and serving the family. But it's a little thing I like to show off every now and then.
Yeah, I get confused if I have to have one thing in each hand. So that would actually be quite useful.
All right. What else we got here? Hey, when you come home from vacation, do you put away stuff right away, or does it sit in the suitcases for a few days? What's your style?
Usually come home and start putting away 85% of it, and then another 15% lingers. I was last on vacation in March. I probably could look around the room and see something that I'm literally looking at a pile of hats that have been there since March break. And this is late April. So 85% of it goes away really quickly. 15% can linger for months.
Similar for me. But I know people that they just, no matter what time of day they get back, what time of the night, they unpack, put everything away, get the laundry put into the laundry bins, whatever, and they just put the suitcases away and they're done. That's not me.
As a family, we usually pack with laundry and whatever doesn't have to be laundry ends up when we're leaving where we are, split into 2. So when we get home, typically the laundry goes right into the washing machine. The rest of the stuff sits on the floor till the next day. And
I love going to a place now with Airbnbs and stuff where you can actually do the laundry while you're there and it comes home clean. That's awesome. That's what I love about Airbnb. Okay, maybe one more. A similar question, I guess. Are you a put everything out the night before kind of guy when it comes to, you got to be out of the house early? Do you put it all in and organize your clothes and whatever it is you got to bring? Or do you just sort of deal with it when you wake up?
No, typically organize the night before. And I'm not a particularly well-organized person, but when it comes to knowing that it's all done in the morning, that to me just translates to 5 or 10 extra minutes the next morning, which I know I'll want more than the going to bed. I can just grab underwear, socks, t-shirt, dress pants, all ready in a pile, ready to go the next morning.
I like when I do that. I'm always thankful for it, but I don't always do it. Although if I have early morning workouts, typically I will put my workout clothes out on the couch in our spare room here. That so like all my workout, like my shorts and my socks and shirt or whatever, and usually a pullover or something that gets put on the couch because I usually get up at like 6 o'clock in the morning and my wife sleeps in a bit later. So I don't want to be pulling drawers and looking for stuff that'll just wake her up, and she hates that.
Yeah. By the nature of my work, also, I get called out quite a bit in the middle of the night. Oh, it's just quite a bit, but frequently. So it's always nice to have it ready to go so you're not stumbling around at 2 o'clock in the morning trying to put together your outfit.
Oh, one more quick one. Now that I think of it, I don't really have I could have an answer for it, but it's police related. And I remember when we went out, you took me on a drive along. And I remember you were saying that the local Tim Hortons, I think it was, had made this rule now. And it sent a letter, I think, even to the police saying that they're no longer going to give out free stuff to police officers, if I got that story right. So what's your take on that, the whole giving police officers free stuff and the expectation thereof? From your perspective, not what do the police say?
The expectation, from my perspective, I don't think the organization would have an opinion much different than mine. When I first got on the job, I thought it was great. Oh my God, they give me free coffee. Oh, free cookies, thank you. And it was very well appreciated. A lot of restaurants do this basically just to entice officers to spend more time around their businesses, which in turn makes them feel more secure. Right? There's police officers in there.
So that's the main reason.
Regularly,
for it,
they hope that acts as a deterrent for any kind of behavior. Well, I believe so, primarily, yes. It might be just some public gratitude towards police officers. I enjoyed it for a while. Then I think I wasn't that far into the job before I was an officer that I was in line. And I didn't care if they gave it to me for free or not. I was always ready to pay. An officer I said, he said, I hate getting when they give it to me for free. And I said, why is that? And he says, because everybody else in line behind me makes a lot less money than I do. And they're giving me this for free. Because Bancroft's not exactly the most affluent town with large industry of any sort. And that kind of stuck with me. And I was like, I'm going to stop taking free stuff. And it used to drive me nuts because I'd go up. Now, I can distinctly remember this back when it was free. An extra large coffee was $1.50. And I'd be ready to pay, and they'd say, no, won't take your money. So I'd take my toonie and put it into the box, kind of.
Right.
Like, hey, look, everyone, I'm putting my toonie in the box.
You did that, making it look like you did it, or you actually did?
Thank you for your generosity.
Here, everybody.
No, I literally
looks like
did
I'm
it.
doing
No,
this.
I didn't palm it. No, I literally would. I'd always have the toonie ready to put into the box to show that I was ready to pay and was going to pay. But then it would frustrate me because I was paying $2 for $1.50 coffee all the time. Because I always had to put the toonie in because you want to give me $1.50 free coffee. And when they sent the letter, I thought, oh, thank God.
That's funny. I didn't know that part of the story.
Because yeah, but it was an older officer who said it, and it's something that struck with me. Like, you're right. Police officers in our society make a good living. I'm certainly not wanting for food on my plate or the heating or the mortgage. All that's I never break a sweat on any of that. Lots of people in my community do. They're good people. They don't have the fortune of having a job that allows them to be comfortable day to day. And here I am taking a free coffee ahead of them. Started to feel guilty and kind of stopped it. I know lots of officers who take the opposite attitude,
which is like they're a bit
I'll leave that to them,
about it when someone says, "Yeah, that's $1.50. Well, now that's $3, please." Or
I'm not gonna. Or I mean, the local McDonald's for years used to give away free food. Like, you would go up and they would refuse to take your money at the drive-thru. And the irony is, I had to stop going to McDonald's. I felt guilty. Other officers felt, well, that's their appreciation. That's what they want to give. I'm not going to insult them by not taking it. My position was no. The position I know of the organization basically is they do not appreciate officers taking free things.
So in corporate land where I reside, that's my area is large corporate. There's a lot of stuff now that's come about in terms of gifting policies. Like commonly we have in our industry we have things like tickets to sporting events and expensive dinners out and things like that. Or flat out giving people gifts, like giving bottles of wine as a gift or bottles of something as gifts at Christmas time. A lot of that stuff's been really tailed back. And a lot of the people we deal with aren't allowed to accept these sorts of things. So it makes it difficult because if, for example, for a hockey game, if you have tickets for a hockey game on a Saturday night, first of all, the quantum of the tickets now, for a hockey game is like several $100s per ticket in many cases. And then you also have the fact that the games on a Saturday, this was a policy companies I work for started implementing a few years ago, was you actually had to go to the game with the client. that was the way to temper off the bribery aspects. It was, well, I'm not just going to give you these, $400 worth of tickets. I'm going to invite you to join me so we can both go to this thing together and, talk about business, not talk about it, whatever. But there was something difficult about having to get a client who had a Saturday with plans or what made that family time to then put everything aside and spend time with you on a Saturday. Like I would find it was much more beneficial when I was a kid, when my dad would get tickets to hockey games, it's like, that's the thing you want people to do, is take the tickets and go bring their son or daughter to the hockey game, not have to spend a Saturday night with a customer. So, but there's a heightened thing around bribery. Gifting policies exist now in most companies. I had a company lunch once where I took a couple clients out and they said, we have to split the bill. We're not allowed to accept, we can't do that. So we both have to split this bill. So that was an automotive company, and that was probably something that was an industry that probably had a lot of potential for bribery. The auto industry is massive. There's so many points along the way that I could see that they wanted to make sure no one was getting influenced inappropriately. So we talked about 40 minutes or 45 minutes. We're almost at an hour, but that's just because I'm having such a good time, and this has morphed a bit into areas I didn't expect, especially in that first topic. But let's move on to and kind of similar to what we started at. What are we watching, reading, or listening to these days that we just want to share a minute or two? Is there anything out there that you're watching right now, or reading, or listening to?
Haven't been reading a lot lately. I'm actually kind of mad at myself. I don't know if it's because I spend all day reading reports or reading the news or on the internet. I spend a phenomenal amount of time reading, yet I don't read a lot of fiction lately, which I love doing. I've been off for the last couple of years not doing that. Watching, my wife and I just finished watching a TV series on Netflix called Beef.
Haven't seen it.
It's about two individuals that get into a road rage incident, and then they become obsessed with each other, trying to ruin the other person's life. And they're both very damaged. It's what I was talking about earlier, where a sitcom has to have a dramatic undercurrent as well. It was very, very much like that. That it was funny in a very black comedy kind of way. That it was because these people were very tragic and broken, but they became obsessed in trying to one up and ruin the other person's life over this single stupid road rage incident. It was good. It was 10 episodes. We just wrapped it up. Enjoyed that thoroughly. My wife and I watch a lot of. My wife likes reality television, which I certainly don't.
Yeah.
I love science fiction and fantasy and that kind of stuff, and she does not. So we at horror we watch a lot of horror movies. So we've seen a few good horror movies lately. I know one that we watch. We watch a lot of arts. My wife likes a lot of arts movies, and I like foreign movies and arts movies. I can get into those. And there was a action movie that was on. It was called RRR. Have you heard of this one?
No.
It's it's an Indian movie. It's out of India from 2022, and it's an action adventure movie. And it's because it's from India. It's also got Bollywood numbers in the middle of it. Anyways, I'd heard good things about it, and I thought I'm going to watch this. And I just happened to flick it on, and my wife came in, and she said, "Oh, what are you watching?" I said, "Oh, it's an action movie." I said, "Just let me watch 20 minutes of it. Your show's not on for 20 minutes,
yeah,
and then you can watch yours, whatever it was that she was." Strangers dating or
yeah,
or obese
dancing.
People or something that she stars dancing or singing or something. Anyways, that wasn't on for 20 minutes. Anyways, she watched 20 minutes of this movie, and then she was enthralled with it. And it's like it's like over 3 hours long, this movie. It is really long. It's
where was it on Netflix?
I think it's on Netflix now. I think it was Netflix. If not, it was on Prime.
R like the letter.
The letters RRR.
Okay.
Sorry, just looked it up here. 182 minutes long. So it's a long movie.
I'm writing that down. I want to watch it.
The action is over the top. It's bombastic. It's absurd. It's got a nice undercurrent story about a kidnapped child from a village under British colonialism. And my wife, that's one of my favorite movies I've watched. I said, really? Because you hate musicals. And when they broke out into it, she says, I love that. It was actually the song that won the Oscar at the most recently passed Academy Awards.
Oh.
Was the musical number. That's just from a Western Hollywood movie perspective. You'd never just see a non-musical just break out into a huge musical number mid-movie. Really good. Really enjoyed it. Just all around good time. Highly entertaining. Long. There's a nice split point in the middle. If you want to put it into a mini series, that would work quite well. But
okay.
Like I say, it's over the top. The action is over the top and absurd, but it's really entertaining.
Okay. Last thing before we wrap. So I don't know if you had a chance. I threw this thing at you because it's been showed up in the media about 2 weeks ago. So this is our strange news story segment. Toronto Blue Jays pitcher claims flight attendant made his pregnant wife clean up after their child, fueling heated Twitter debate. So it says here, he tweeted, the flight attendant at United just made my 22-week pregnant wife traveling with a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old get on her hands and knees to pick up the popcorn mess by youngest daughter. Are you kidding me? Is what he wrote. First thing I thought about was why do celebrity people or whatever you want to call him go on Twitter and write these sorts of things? Mm-hmm. Like, to me, that's just asking for trouble.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the actual topic. I've been doing a lot of traveling after COVID. Had a lot of extra money in my vacation fund, so I managed to run around quite a bit and been flying a lot. I'd have to have more context for what happened there based on how big of a mess must this child have made in order to get an airline attendant to say, hey, could you tidy that up?
Oh, you haven't seen the picture?
No, I haven't. I didn't see it. I quickly saw something. It was it might have been the two girls in a business class seats, it looked like.
No, I think they were just in regular
Were they in
seats.
regular?
I think so. And they had... it was like half a bag of maybe a quarter of a bag of popcorn. The contents of it were underneath the seat, basically. And I thought, yeah, it's a mess, but there was the Twitter reaction to it. There was, I would say, 80% of it was negative towards him, saying, you entitled person, you make millions of dollars, pick up after your own kids. Flight attendants are there for your safety, not to clean up after your kids. And I think the thing that struck out for me was flight attendants are there for your safety, but they're also there to bring your food and your drinks. And if you spill something, they help you clean it up. So I personally believe that the reaction of calling out this pregnant, never mind that she's pregnant, that's part of it, but not the only thing. But to say to a customer, go clean that mess up. And again, context, we weren't there. We didn't hear the words used. We don't really know for the full story. But to me, no, I don't. Yes, they're there for safety, but they are there to do other things that are to serve you as a customer. So why put yourself in this position in the first place as a celebrity?
Well, and like you said, I'm surprised celebrities bother to do that. I just called up the picture to look at it. Yeah, that's not an absurd amount of mess. I like to think that if my kid, actually, I can say when my kid, we got off a plane and my youngsters were small, I would try to clean up as best as possible before leaving.
Yeah.
Now that woman was apparently pregnant and
had two small kids.
Had two small kids, which would make it a little bit more difficult. Again, I'd need more context, but I think that your original takeaway is the main thing. Look, you're a celebrity, just complain to the airline, say that you thought that was wrong, and tell them what your concern was, that you did not feel that was taken. That's what the rest of us regular people have to do.
That's right.
I go on Twitter and complain. No one cares. They care because he's a celebrity.
Yeah.
And that's a double-edged sword. And as you said, if 80% of people who take the time to respond, and again, that's 80% of people who take the time to respond are negative towards him, that's what you get.
Yep, for sure. All right. Well, Brian, this has been an awesome time spent with you. I'm so glad you came on.
Well, I've really enjoyed it.
I hope you come back because I think there's so many other things we could dig into. This tends to happen on this episode, that topics tend to beget other topics. So let's make sure we get together and maybe we can talk about some of those things from high school, like, writing lines or things that maybe kids of today just wouldn't really get or understand. And yeah, there's a whole bunch of rabbit trails we could certainly go down with the high school topic. But I did really enjoy this, Brian.
Oh, I did. I had a great time. I really enjoyed doing it. Thank you very much for having me on. I appreciate that.
Get to scratch that creative side a little.
Yeah, like I said, get in front of a microphone again to chatter.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, and look forward to having you on a future episode.
I look forward to it. Thanks, Clark.